So the question is whether English will continue to maintain its global status, or is it fated to weaken its status, or is it going to be challenged by other languages or other varieties of English? So in this regard, in order to answer to these questions, our textbook author, David Crystal, he introduced 3 hindrances as a basis to discuss this issue. So far we have talked about the 3 hindrances. First of all, the future of English can be weakened if some countries or some people continue to reject the use of English as official or secondary language. And also, second, we have also talked about the use of the regional lingua franca. For example, the Spanish are still used as the regional lingua franca for most of the countries in Latin America. And Chinese are also often used as the regional lingua franca for Asia, many of Asian countries. And also we're talking about the fragmentation of English into many varieties of English. So it is about the issue of the intelligibility. In another word, if you are speaking English, there are so many varieties of English, so they cannot comprehend one another. For example, even the native speakers, like American and British, if they visit some countries in Caribbean or in Africa countries, even though they are talking with people who are speaking English, they cannot understand their English because they are so different variety of English. For example, that is Creole. So these are the 3 issues that was cited as the obstacle to the future status of English as a world common language. So now we are going to talk about another aspect of positive things. In another word, these are the words. Are there any reasons for English language to remain as global status despite the challenge from other languages? So in another word, are there any strengths or advantages that uniquely English has so that the English position as the English language will remain unshaken? So in this regard, we'd like to share the David Crystal's suggested reasons for the English's strength. The first one is, he said, the English is actually sitting on a wide variety of cultural legacy. So in another word, English is a means to access the USA list of cultural legacy, something like media, press, broadcasting, printing, sports marketing, air traffic control, education, and communication. So let's take an example. So English has been the major media of communication in the press. For example, in the United States, in 1850, there were 400 newspapers published and distributed in English language. But in 1900, the number increased to 2,000 newspapers published in English language in the USA. And also, English is a dominant language in the area of advertising. As you know, from the end of the 19th century, the demand for advertising has jumped because of the mass production started to produce cars and textile and clothes, and the market competition has become more fierce, and there were more and more middle-class people. They have bigger consuming power. So everywhere you go, everywhere you travel in the United States or in Britain, that you can see a lot of outdoor media, something like a poster, billboard, electric display, and shop signs. Everything is printed in English language. So especially the power of advertising is based on the USA. The USA has led the world in terms of advertising expenditures. For example, in 1953, that advertising expenditures represent 2.6% of the country's gross national income. The figure is much bigger than the British counterpart. So let's take an example of broadcasting. English is the dominant language in the broadcasting services in the global society. For example, in the USA in 1940, there were only 20 TV stations. But by 1999, the total number of TV stations rose to 1,500. And it also has the global reach of, it has the domestic reach of 200 million audience. And in other words, there are 200 million TV receivers were in the United States by 1995. So let's take another example of BBC in Britain. And in 2001, the BBC broadcasting it was broadcasting over 1,000 hours per week, and a global audience of 153 million, and was reaching to 120 capital cities, and with a listening audience in English about 40 million people. This is very awesome. So he also continues the English strength lies on it is sitting on a wide spectrum of cultural legacy, like international travel, international safety, and education, and communication. And we are done with the first reason that English is uniquely strong because of its cultural legacy. Then what is the second reason? The second reason is English is distinct because it has been in constant contact with the different languages. So in other words, the English history is 1,500 years, and English is very unique because English is a result of a centuries-long process of being in contact with the different cultures and different languages and different peoples. So let's contrast to the English with Chinese. Chinese usually stayed inside China, and Hindi language usually stayed within India or Pakistan or Bhutan and Pakistan country, and in the southeast country. So its political power never moved beyond the Asia continent. In contrast, the English is different. English has moved from the Britain Island to European countries and also moved to West African, it moved to Caribbean, it moved to Australia, New Zealand, it moved to America and Canada. It continues to move from one continent to another. So let's take an example here. So English is a result of its constant contact with the different languages. For example, let's start with the Celtic traces left in English. So in current English, there are many Celtic traces. For example, there are many Celtic traces in city names. Belfast, New York, London, and Glasgow is one example. And another example is found English names in river names, like Avon, Dee, Don, Forth. And also many of the region names came from the Celtic language, like Devon, Glasmogan, and Kent. And also know the Britain people were under the Roman colonial rule for about 500 years. Therefore, it was inevitable for them that there was a Latin contribution to English words. So these are the Latin contribution to English words, place names like Dorchester, Manchester, or Lancaster, or Newport, and Portsmouth. Also, the English words borrowed from Scandinavian Danish lord. So as you know, there was a Viking attack into the British people. It was around the 6th century to 9th century. So it was inevitable to have the Scandinavian traces in English words. The example English words from Scandinavian people are sky, skin, and skill, and scrape, and whisk, and bask. And also after that, as you know, the English now became under the Norman French rule. At that time, the English society was linguistically divided into upper class who were speaking in French language and to the low-life people who were speaking English. So English also was adopted from the Norman French. The English words usually about law or court. For example, these are the example English words from Norman French: justice, perjury, attorney, prison, parliament, prince, baron, and duchess. And also that English, or some of the English words came from the Arab, and it was from the France. Maybe the France is the colonial power in some European countries. So through the French, that English words adopted the Arabian languages through the French people. The examples are cent, amber, saphiron, dime, apache, and cajun. And also the spread of English moved to the American. So at that time, Europeans arrived in America, and there are so many plants or animals and something that have never seen in their life. So they have got their names from native Indians. The examples are wigwam and tomahawk and Cherokee and Mohawk and raccoon and skunk and woodchuck and moose and caucus, Indian file, Indian summer, and going on the warpath or happy hunting ground. These are the English words that they adopted from the native Indian. So it's interesting to note that there starts the difference between the American English and the British English. American English, they adopted the words from native Indians, but British, they didn't. Therefore, these are the vocabulary that we can only find in the American English. Let's continue with the English words that came from the native Indians. So the keeping one's ear to the ground, or scalp hunting, or scalper, or sending out smoke signals, and mugwump. This is an interesting word, the mugwump. It used to be a dialect of an Attic Indian tribe. It means people who are politically independent. He does not support any political parties. Or mugwump means that they are indifferent to the politics. So the mugwump used to be the Indian tribe's dialect, but it was adopted the English word mugwump. And also, as you know, the Dutch people used to occupy the New York City. So there wasn't a lot of influences of Dutch influences in the English languages. So these are the example of Dutch words that were merged into English. The Harlem, Brooklyn, Bronx, cookie, stoop, waffle, and poppycock, scowl, patron, caboose, booth, and the Yankee and Santa Claus. And also, we have the Spanish has a lot of influences in English words. And these are the Spanish words that was adopted by the English words. That is a barbecue, tobacco, and tomato, chocolate, avocado, marijuana, coyote, taco, ponco, adobe, cafeteria, plaza, cannon, and creole. And also the Africa, as you know, there was a triangle of African triangle, Atlantic voyage, so there was many African slaves were shipped into the American. So the African, they also brought their own local language into English words. Example is banana, okay, and the bogus. And also the Indian, there was Indian words from India. There was a close connection, only connection between British Empire and India. So the example Indian words we can find in English is curry, juggernaut, and the pandit, and the pyjama, and bungalow. And also, we can talk about Australia. When the European arrived in Australia, wow, there were so many animals, and they have never seen in their life. The kangaroo, koala are examples, and they adopted words from their local people in Australia. And also the boomerang and walkabout. So walkabout is a meeting. Now it means as a meeting. It used to mean an adult that was going around in the wood alone. And also there is interesting word, chap. Chap means people who are very rude. And it's a mocking expression to refer to the people who are rude. And also credit crunch, baby boomer, and free fall, these are the words that came from Australia. Of course, the French language remained as a word of diplomacy, so English words came from the French for the dent or the marché. Also, there are some Yiddish expression in English. So don't ask, or go figure means I can't understand, and don't ask means don't ask me a question that makes me uncomfortable, and enough already means it is irritating, stop it, and glitch is a small defect in machine, and bagel and schmuck is someone is very stupid and crazy. So this wraps up the second reason that explained why English is strong as a global language. So let's move on to the third reason that makes English powerful. Its future potential is powerful enough.